DFS. It is Friday, January 6th here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to our Week 18 DraftKings podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me, as always, is Jared Smola. Jared, we got Week 18. We got most of the teams on the slate. We got 2 Saturday games, taking some key players out that we'll kind of talk about as we go through. We've got one Sunday night game that is on one main slate, but not on the other. So we'll start with DraftKings as usual. And for cash, I'm curious to know where you're going this week.
Yeah, I think there are quite a few viable options. And I think, in your cash lineup, you definitely want to try to stick to these teams that we know are playing for something. We know they're going to play their starters the full game. I have Joe Burrow in my cash lineup as of now, $7,300. Cincinnati's been the pass heaviest offense in the NFL over the last 5 weeks by a pretty significant margin. I think that should continue this week against Baltimore. Baltimore 7th in Football Outsiders run defense DVOA over the last 5 weeks. They're 27th against the pass, and they've been that way all season. They've been a tougher run D than a pass D. So expect a pass heavy game from the Bengals. Burrow had just 217 yards and 1 touchdown against Baltimore earlier this season. That was one of the games where Tee Higgins didn't play much at all. Higgins played 10 snaps in that game. Go back to last year, Burrow put up 416 yards and 3 touchdowns, and then 525 yards and 4 touchdowns against this Ravens defense. So he's definitely had success against this defense.
Yeah, and this year's version is one that's playing the run tougher than the pass, so I'm not worried about Joe Burrow against his defense. And yeah, so whenever I'm setting up my notes for this show or just starting my thinking about building lineups, I open up the Draft Sharks lineup generator. I check the dollars per point rankings, and I start out looking for the cheaper quarterbacks. So, of course, I started out with Geno Smith, 6K against the Rams, Brock Purdy, 5,700 against the Cardinals. But then I look at the rest of the positions, and I think that it's quite possible to get Joe Burrow or Kirk Cousins for 6,500 if you need that level of roster savings. I think it's quite possible to get either of those guys in your cash lineup and still have attractive plays at the other position. So I think Joe Burrow is going to be my cash quarterback as well. I think if you do need to go down, Geno Smith makes sense. The Rams are a bottom 10 scoring matchup for quarterbacks by our adjusted fantasy points allowed, meaning it's a negative matchup for quarterbacks so far. But Geno Smith hit them for 367 and 3 touchdowns in their last meeting. The questions here are the wide receivers. Tyler Lockett missed practice Thursday. We'll see about him today. He said earlier in the week he was going to play. I'm sure that if he's capable at all, he's going to play. But there's, some iffiness there. DK Metcalf sat out Thursday, probably more of a rest day than an injury. But, again, just another question mark. I don't think you necessarily need one of those guys in your lineup to play Geno. It's an affordable price. I'm not too worried about him against the Rams, but there is a little bit of downside risk there.
Yeah, for sure. I think Geno's viable for cash, like you said. Purdy's viable for cash. I throw in Dak Prescott too for $6,600 if you do need the savings off Burrow. I think he's a viable cash play. So again, lots of options. I think this is a week where you kind of fill out most of the rest of your team first, and then go back to quarterback near the end, and play any one of these 4 or 5 guys.
In tournament contests. There we go. Now I'm on the right track. In tournaments, that's where I really want to make sure to get Joe Burrow into the lineup, though, because as you mentioned, that ultimate ceiling he has already showed. And then just last week, 40 of 52 passing for 375 and 3 touchdowns against the Patriots. They got a little bit shakier in the second half, but they clearly just came out firing in a matchup that favored throwing over running. I'm going to have to get my English straight before we finish out the shows here, Jared. So I think the ultimate upside's there. I think the Bengals mindset for throwing when it makes sense is there. I think Joe Burrow has a chance to be the guy that you need to have here when you add in the salary savings versus Josh Allen.
Yeah, 5 games of 28 plus DraftKings points for Joe Burrow this season, including 3 of his past 6 games. So he definitely has shown the tournament winning upside. I think Brock Purdy is in play for tournaments too this week. He has 2 touchdowns in all 5 of his games now. He's only topped out at 21.7 DraftKings points, so he hasn't really shown the ceiling yet. But I mean, give him a 3rd touchdown in any of these games. I definitely think it's possible this week, and he's there at 25, 26 points, which I think might be good enough this week. I mean, if Burrow doesn't explode, you have Josh Allen against a pretty tough Patriots defense. You have Jalen Hurts coming off the injury in a game where the Eagles should win easily, where, maybe he doesn't have to do much in the second half. So I think this is a week where, maybe no one gets to 35 points, and, 25 from Purdy at $5,700 is enough. Christian McCaffrey is banged up. We'll see if he plays, and if he does, if they limit him a bit, that could mean a bit more passing. It looks like Purdy, there's a chance he gets Deebo Samuel back for this game. And then the Niners have the second highest implied total on the main slate at 27.25 points, behind only the Eagles. They're ahead of the Vikings. They're ahead of the Bills. They're ahead of the Bengals. They're ahead of the Cowboys. So definitely plenty of touchdown upside for Purdy in this spot.
Yeah, my only question with them for chasing ceiling is if they take their foot off the gas at some point during this game, if they find out the Eagles are way ahead so they can't win the top seed, or, even if they just get a big lead on Arizona and start pulling starters. So, I'm not going to say I'm not playing Purdy for that reason, but that's my concern about chasing ceiling. Also, if the Niners pull starters, does Brock Purdy get pulled with that group? I would assume so, because he would be their starting quarterback in the playoffs, but I don't know for sure. He's still a relatively inexperienced quarterback, and I'm sure any reps they get him help.
Yeah, I would guess he'd get pulled. I mean, we don't know for sure. This is the risk you're playing. You're taking playing Week 18 DFS, is that you're going to get screwed over by something funky. But you guys got to embrace the variance of the week, I guess.
Yeah, we at least start with a motivated team, so that's something to go with. If you are playing a Joe Burrow tournament lineup, are you running back Mark Andrews or nobody from Baltimore?
If I run back someone, it would definitely be Andrews. He's not a must for me. I don't think he's a good play in a vacuum. And I definitely think, the Bengals have shown they'll keep attacking. They did it against the Patriots, like you said a couple weeks ago. They'll keep attacking with a big lead. So I would lean towards no run back on my Burrow teams.
I agree. That'd be my lean too. I mean, if I'm playing a bunch of them, I'll get a little bit of Mark Andrews in there, but we could absolutely get a big offensive day from Cincinnati with nothing going well on the Baltimore side. And I mean, we could get a 10 target day for Mark Andrews where he catches 4 of them. So that's not a guy that you need to play.
For sure.
Running back for cash, Najee Harris at 6,100 and Miles Sanders at 5,900 sit atop our DK dollars per point. And I like them both very much. Touch certainty for them. Positive matchups for both of them. Cleveland's 29th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. That's the matchup for Najee Harris. Miles Sanders gets the Giants, who he already gashed once this year. It seems like his knee is okay. We talked yesterday about how it's tough to know if the knee limited his playing time at all, but it seemed more like game flow and just kind of a weird game against the Saints that did it last week than concerns about Miles Sanders' knee.
Yeah, I love Miles Sanders this week, especially at $5,900 in the matchup. As you mentioned, he'll be probably in at least most tournament teams I make. I don't think I can play him in cash. Just the volume funkiness we've seen from him throughout the season. I mean, he hasn't even hit 10 DK points in any of his last 3 games. So for me in cash, it's going to be Najee Harris, as you mentioned, 62 carries and 12 targets over his last 3 games now. Gets this Browns run defense that we've been attacking all season. So I like Najee. I like Cam Akers for $6,200. He's been getting workhorse usage for the past 3 weeks now. He gets a good matchup against the Seahawks. And then my third cash running back is going to be Dalvin Cook, $7,300. He is another guy who's been getting workhorse usage outside of the 2 blowout losses to the Cowboys and then the Packers last week. Dalvin Cook has 17 plus opportunities in 8 straight games, and he gets the Bears, who have been bad against the run all season, haven't been any better lately.
He is in another game where I worry about the Vikings taking their foot off the gas, and I feel like he would probably be the first guy off the field if they do start to ease up on things. It might even be a spot where they plan to give Alexander Mattison the ball a little bit more, knowing that they probably don't need their best game to beat the Bears and that it might not even matter what happens in that game. So I would worry a little bit about the cash certainty for Dalvin Cook, although the price is fine for him.
Yeah, the price is great. I mean, I think he's $1,000 underpriced in the matchup. That is a slight concern. You got to hope if they do have a big lead in the second half, it's because Cook helps them get there, which I think would be the case more than likely.
Tournament side, I think all the guys we talked about are still in play. Zach Moss is the other guy I would consider here, 5,200 against the league's worst run defense. And I mean, that's it. The Colts, the only thing that hasn't gone right for Zach Moss production-wise the past couple weeks is getting the ball enough. And you would like to think the Colts with Sam Ehlinger, quarterback, playing the Texans, are going to fix that issue this week and give him the ball plenty. So the upside is there. Tyler Algier also in play for me at 5,600 against a Bucs team that has, nothing to really play for this week.
Yeah, love Algier. 55 carries over his last 3 games, averaging 5.4 yards per carry. Like you said, the Falcons are favored by 4 points in this game, which tells you all you need to know about what to expect from the Bucks. Zach Moss, I have here, and as I started to dig into him, I'm not sure I like him because I just don't know if he has the upside you need to win a tournament. I mean, it's still a bad Colts offense. I'm not sure Moss is a great touchdown bat. He's still doing nothing in the passing game. I mean, despite the nice volume over the last 3 weeks, he scored 8.1, 8.0, and 7.4 DraftKings points. I'm just not sure he has the 20-point upside that you need to win a tournament.
I mean, I do think that if he does get to 20 carries in this game, which is possible because he did it a couple games ago in relief, there is 100-yard upside if he gets a touchdown. I mean, they just need to get close to the end zone for there to be a touchdown. So I certainly would never say that Zach Moss is a must or that Zach Moss is a centerpiece, but at 5,200 with the possibility that he gets workhorse carries, I like the upside.
Yeah, we're still waiting on ownership projections too, so that'll kind of sway me as far as Moss goes. If he's going to be chalky, I think he's a good tournament fade. So we mentioned Miles Sanders. I think he's my favorite tournament play at running back. Algier. I also like Kenneth Walker at $6,400. 26 and 23 carries over the last 2 games. So he's dealing with an ankle, but the Seahawks are not limiting his work because of it. And this is a must-win game for Seattle. So I think they're going to give Walker as much as he can handle. The Rams, 26th in Football Outsiders run defense DVOA over the last 5 weeks. Most, if not all of that span is when they've been without Aaron Donald, who of course will be out again on Sunday.
Yeah, I got gashed last week by the Chargers, so I like that. And just to be clear, if we get like 20% ownership projection or something on Zach Moss, I'm totally out on him as well.
Nice.
Wide receiver for cash, Greg Dortch at 3,800 against the 49ers looks intriguing. 70+% playing time for him in 6 games this season. He had 9+ targets in 5 of those, including each of the past 2 weeks. Just 4 catches for 15 yards last week, but 10 targets, 9 catches for 103 in the first meeting with the 49ers this year. Like I said, decent chance I think that the Niners take the foot off the gas at some point during this game. If not, then I think they're up big and the Cardinals are chasing and there are targets available. So either way, when you throw in the sub 4K salary, I think Greg Dortch is attractive.
Yeah, he's definitely in play. He is our second best dollars per point value at wide receiver. I don't currently have Dortch in my cash lineup. I have Drake London is my first guy in, $4,900. His price didn't move from last week. And he didn't have a huge game last week, 5 catches, 47 yards, but he saw another 8 targets in that one. It gives him 28 total targets over the past 3 games with Desmond Ridder. And again, he's probably going to be getting at least some backups in the Bucs secondary. So like London at the price tag. DK Metcalf, $6,700. We'll see about the knee thing. He did not practice on Thursday. He was listed with the knee and rest. So not totally sure of what to make of that. But he's more healthy than Tyler Lockett, I think, at this point, who is dealing with the finger injury plus the shin injury. And Metcalf coming off a dud last week against that tough Jets secondary, but he had 12.5 plus DraftKings points in 8 straight games prior to last week. He averaged 17.5 DK points over those 8 games. And that stretch includes a 29.7 point game against the Rams a few weeks ago.
Yeah, Jalen Ramsey's not scaring anybody this season, has never scared DK Metcalf. I agree with London, 8+ targets, 5+ catches in 4 straight games. I will also throw in Garrett Wilson at $5,800 against the Dolphins. Since Mike White stepped in week 12, we'll start with that. Garrett Wilson has averaged 9.8 targets, 5 catches, 80.2 yards per game, 16 yards per catch. No Mike White this week because of the rib injury. Joe Flacco's in. So I think if they're both healthy, it's probably a toss-up between those guys, but a healthy Joe Flacco versus what was clearly an ailing Mike White last week is certainly an upgrade for Garrett Wilson here. Miami is a middle of the league wide receiver scoring matchup, 25th in pass defense DVOA overall, according to Football Outsiders. And even with terrible catch rates over the past 3 games, 38% catch rate over the past 3 weeks for Garrett Wilson, he's still at 57% for the season, despite playing with garbage quarterbacks all year. So that's just another nod to how well the rookie has played this year. I think there's big game potential for him this week.
For sure, yeah, and play in cash and tournaments for me, Garrett Wilson is. We saw the Jets be more willing to go pass heavy with Flacco over the first 3 games of the season. I'm not necessarily banking on that being the case on Sunday, but it's at least possible. Wilson, by the way, 21% target share from Joe Flacco over those first 3 games. And he wasn't even a full-time player yet at that point. He only ran her out on 64% of the pass plays. So 30% target per route run rate for Wilson in those games, which is an elite mark. Like if he is going to be a full-time player on Sunday, which he is, and maintains that number, you could be in for a massive volume for Garrett Wilson.
Yeah, so I started with Greg Dortch because of the salary, but like at quarterback, it's quite possible that we do that. And then I get to the end of lineup setting. I'm like, I don't need Greg Dortch in here. I can have real guys at wide receiver. Over on the tourney side, I like as a cheap game stack, DJ Moore and Rashid Shaheed. DJ Moore, 6,100, 18 plus DK points in 3 straight games in 4 of his past 5. He has cracked 20 DK points in 3 of those games, including each of the past 2 weeks. The Marshawn Lattimore return for the Saints defense does complicate the matchup a bit, but the Panthers still move DJ Moore around. He played more than half of his snaps against Detroit in the slot in week 16. So they're willing to put him in there. It doesn't necessarily mean he'll avoid Lattimore, but he's also a good player. So I'm not going to say that DJ Moore can't win against Marshawn Lattimore. And then Rashid Shaheed, the other side, $4,200 salary for him on DraftKings this week, right with Chris Olave last week in playing time. He's got that big play speed where even if he catches 3 or 4 balls, he's capable of turning one of those into a big touchdown play. Playing the league's best scoring matchup for wide receivers by our adjusted fantasy points allowed. We just saw the Buccaneers destroy them last week, and Shaheed's $2,000 cheaper than Olave on DK.
Yeah, Carolina also 25th defending deep passes, according to Football Outsiders. So I do like Shaheed. I think he is the better value among these two. And we're still waiting on ownership projections, but I won't be surprised if Shaheed comes in higher owned than Chris Olave. So I do think, being contrarian, paying the extra $2K for Olave, who, this is still Chris Olave versus Rashid Shaheed. Like, I know Shaheed outproduced him last week, but I still think Olave ultimately has the higher ceiling. So I'm interested in both of those guys for tournaments.
Yeah, I agree. Anybody else?
Who else do I have here? So Justin Jefferson, I think, is interesting. Again, there's the concern of how much will he need to do? How much will he play in this game? He does need 194 yards to break Calvin Johnson's single season record. He went for 154 yards against the Bears earlier this season. Like, if the Vikings want Justin Jefferson to break the record, like, I think they can probably get him there in this matchup. So I just think he's interesting. We'll see about the ownership, if he's going to be low owned because of the price and because of the concerns about Minnesota, possibly pulling guys. I think he's interesting. And then Cortland Sutton, I'm gonna go back to him. I played him a bit last week. He's still just $4,800. Only had 4 catches for 44 yards last week. He did almost come down with a big play. Would have been like a 40 or 50 yard catch. Couldn't quite corral it in as he went to the ground. But I'd still like the price tag for a talented player playing a significant role in this offense. And you have the Chargers as a team that could rest guys in that late window. If the Ravens lose to the Bengals in the 1 p.m. slot, the Chargers will have nothing to play for at the 4:25 p.m. slot. So there's a chance that Sutton's playing against backups.
One other argument for a guy like that in a bad offense and the Saints-Panthers matchup we talked about before. This is not a good week for point projections around the league. Like that Panthers-Saints game has a 42-point total. Only 3 main slate games have higher Vegas totals than that.
Yeah, it's ugly.
Over to tight end. Speaking of ugly, it's the ugly week at tight end for cash. We got Travis Kelce off the main slate. We've got Evan Engram off the main slate. The top value in our lineup generator is Hayden Hurst at 3,100. At first, Jared, I was leaning away from him. The last time we saw Hurst for a full game was the stretch when Jamar Chase was still out. I think, though, he's probably the best option among those 3K guys when you consider everything. I don't love him for upside. He's reached 50 yards just twice all year, never reached 60, has not scored a touchdown since week 5 and has just 2 touchdowns all year, but did have a 6 for 53 and a touchdown line on 7 targets in the first meeting with Baltimore. Bengals tight ends produced in both matchups with Baltimore last year. And we already talked about with Joe Burrow, we're betting that Cincinnati does plenty of passing in this game.
Yeah, I'm starting with Hurst in cash lineups. Actually returned, he missed a few games with, I believe it was a calf injury. He returned last week and actually caught 2 balls early in that Bills game. Has 4+ catches in 7 of his 10 healthy games this season. So like you said, not a ceiling play, but I think a nice floor relative to the other options at tight end, especially considering the price tag. If you do have the extra $700, I do prefer Pat Fryermuth straight up over Hayden Hurst. But again, that's only if you have the extra money. I think it's pretty close between them. So I wouldn't, go downgrading any other spot to get up to Fryermuth at tight end.
And I wouldn't even make a strong argument for Pat Fryermuth if you have the savings. Browns are the third worst scoring matchup for tight ends. They've allowed 2 touchdowns to the position all season. They did allow a solid line in PPR to Logan Thomas last week, so it's not a scary matchup. But Fryermuth also has 3 catches or fewer in 5 of his past 6 games. So, he can get plenty of targets and give us solid PPR numbers, but he could also just have another dud.
Hurst it is.
There you go. Other guys in that range, just like there are issues for all of them. Trey McBride, Tyler Higbee, I think are guys you could consider, but we talked about Greg Dortch being an option. We talked about Cam Akers being an option. I'm not playing 2 guys from either of those teams in definitely not a cash lineup, probably not a tournament lineup either.
Agreed. Totally.
There are a couple of sub 3K options. I don't think we need to get down there for a cash lineup though. On the tournament side, I'm checking ownership projections on Cam Akers and Tyler Higbee to see if either of those guys is a fade for that reason. Like if Cam Akers is very popular, maybe I'll lean toward Tyler Higbee in that matchup with Seattle that's been very favorable to tight end scoring this year. I'm more willing to get to Higbee in that case and in a tournament lineup. Otherwise, the guy I'll throw in here, 2 guys I'll throw in. Dallas Goedert, 4,900, I think is in play for a tournament lineup. And then $3,600 Tyler Conklin for the Jets is also in play here in a positive matchup against the Dolphins.
Like both those guys, especially Goddard, quiet in the box score his last 2 games, but 89 and then 97% of the routes last week. Gets the Giants dead last in Football Outsiders tight end coverage rankings. Obviously gave up that massive game to TJ Hawkinson a couple weeks ago. Higbee's $4,400. I can't imagine he's going to be popular at that price tag. I think Akers is clearly the best value on the Rams. I would expect Akers to be chalky and Higbee to end up being pretty low owned. We'll see exactly how they come in. I think paying up for George Kittle is going to be pretty contrarian this week with so many viable plays in the 3 and 4Ks. Kittle has 25 and 33 point games with Brock Purdy over the last 5 weeks. He also went for 24.4 DraftKings points against the Cardinals back in week 11. That was with Jimmy Garoppolo. Cardinals 30th in adjusted points allowed to tight ends, 29th in Football Outsiders tight end coverage ranking. So one of the best tight end matchups for Kittle this week. So I like paying up for him. And then last guy I'll throw out, David Njoku. He's one of these tight ends in the 3K range that I think is in play. $3,900 for Njoku. I just think he has the highest ceiling among all these 3K tight ends, even most of the 4K guys. We saw him have an 18.7 point game with Deshaun Watson. It was Njoku's first game with Watson. Njoku went for 24 DraftKings points in the week 3 meeting against Pittsburgh. So I just think he's the cheap tight end that has the upside to go for 20 plus DK points.
Yeah, can't argue with that. I'll be curious to see the ownership projection on Kittle in particular, because we don't have Travis Kelce to be the popular high-end guy. Mark Andrews hasn't been doing it lately, although he did do it last week. So we'll see if he soaks up some ownership this week. I'll be curious to see what the numbers look like on those guys. Defense, $2,600 Jets defense leads the way in our lineup generator in dollars per point. Makes plenty of sense against Skylar Thompson, probably. We're waiting final word on that, but probably Skylar Thompson. So I think the Jets D is easy to like. Maybe the best reason to not play the Jets D is because you could pay $300 more and get the Vikings against Nathan Peterman.
Yes, exactly. I think you want to play one of those 2 defenses in cash. I'm okay with the Jets if you need those $300. I actually do have the Jets in my lineup right now. It's either going to be Thompson or it's going to be Teddy Bridgewater with a bad finger on his throwing hand. So I think either way, it's a good spot for the Jets D. Vikings, great play against Peterman. 2 other defenses probably going to be lower owned, cheap options. Atlanta at $2,400. Again, I'm not expecting Tom Brady to play more than a couple series if he plays at all. So at that point, it's either going to be Blaine Gabbert or Kyle Trask under center for the Bucs. So like that matchup for Atlanta. And then New England at $2,200. I mean, they've just been a good fantasy D all season. And we know Josh Allen, has the propensity to turn it over a few times every now and again. So I do think there's upside to the Patriots at $2,200.
I'll give them upside, but I'd be scared to attack that one this week against these Bills. The Falcons, I can see the upside case there against the Bucs. They would just be a tourney play for me because I mean, I don't know who the quarterback's going to be if and when Tom Brady's out of this game. Blaine Gabbert has showed us that he is capable of playing well at times, and there aren't that many wide receivers on their roster, so I'm not even sure. Obviously, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin come out, but we might still be looking at Russell Gage in the mix. Scotty Miller, I'm sure, is on the field, so they're decent at wide receiver. I don't know who's going to be in the backfield, whether Rashad White gets the breather if they're pulling people or if he stays in the game. So just saying there's a chance that there's still a decent amount of offensive talent on the field for a Bucs team that is playing backups there. So a little bit of downside risk for a Falcons defense that, starts out not being very good.
Yeah, Falcons and Patriots are tournament only for me. Gabbert does have a career 3.1% interception rate. He's definitely a guy I would like to attack with the defense.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's going to do it for this week 18 DraftKings podcast. You can head over to draftsharks.com now, play around with the lineup generator, build your own lineups for playing on DraftKings, FanDuel, and Yahoo in week 18. You can also find Jared's articles highlighting top picks for cash and GPP entries on DraftKings this week. If you're on the stream, stick around. We're going to hit FanDuel in about 10 seconds. For Jared Small and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schaff saying thanks so much for swimming with us. It is Friday, January 6th here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to the Week 18 FanDuel podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schaff. With me, as always, is Jared Small. And Jared, it is worth noting before we get to any of the positions here on FanDuel that Packers-Lions, despite being on Sunday night, is on the main slate on FanDuel. It is not on the main slate on DraftKings, but it is here. It's similar to what we saw last week. Apparently, FanDuel just sets its slate, and then it's like, forget it. I don't care what the NFL does to the schedule. These are the teams we're using, so go ahead and play them. This is different from last week in that it was not a flex situation. The NFL just doesn't set the Week 18 schedule until it knows the playoff scenarios to try to match them up. So I don't think it affects where I'm looking at quarterback here, but it might come into play at some other positions.
Yeah, Packers-Lions a fun cap to the week. Definitely some plays, I think, in tournaments for me that could be interesting in that one. Quarterback, FanDuel cash. I think Josh Allen's in play at $8,800. The way I'm building my cash lineup though now, I'm going cheaper into the $7K range. I like Dak Prescott at $7,500. We know there's been volume issues for him, which has sometimes capped the ceiling, but he has multiple passing touchdowns in 8 of his last 9 games now. He's getting this Washington team that seems like they're kind of treating this as a preseason game, so they could definitely rest or sit some defensive starters. Washington, anyways, they're just 26th in Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA over the past 5 weeks now. So it's been a fine matchup to begin with. So I think Dak, with the Cowboys having plenty to play for still in this one, is a pretty safe cash game quarterback on FanDuel.
I'm curious to see how this game goes because it could easily be a Cowboys blowout. And I think there are going to be a lot of defensive guys missing too. So we could just get a ton of Cowboys rushing in this game as well. That said, last Thursday night, we had the Cowboys against Josh Dobbs and defensive backups for the Titans, and we had a competitive game for like 3/4 of it. So we could see the Cowboys locked up in this. And like you said, they do have something to play for throughout. So I won't argue against Dak Prescott. Feel a little bit better about Joe Burrow at $8,200, $700 difference. We'll see about how the rest of the lineup builds up around him. But, the upside is obvious. I'm not at all worried about the matchup. And we saw just last week that the Bengals are willing to throw 52 passes in a game where they led the entire way against New England. So we know that we don't need an ultimately competitive Ravens game for Joe Burrow to get a lot of opportunities and to hit his guys for plenty of points.
For sure, yeah. And I especially like Burrow for FanDuel tournaments. And I think just where he's priced, he's closer in price to the Allen and Jalen Hurts tier on FanDuel than he is on DraftKings. So I think he's going to be lower owned on FanDuel. So Burrow's my favorite tournament play on FanDuel.
I'm very curious to see what the ownership numbers look like for these guys because I don't think it's hard to envision Joe Burrow being as popular as Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts this week. Allen's got a tougher matchup, more likely, just based on looking at the numbers for everything. Jalen Hurts has the shoulder question. He has the question of whether his team just destroys a Giants squad that they beat when they were trying. Like it was a one-sided game when the Giants were actually playing, and now they're going to get Giants backups. So, yep. There's some concern that Jalen Hurts doesn't get a ceiling game here just because of that. So I'm going to be looking at what the ownership projections are on the three guys and kind of using that to some degree to decide where I want to lean. Josh Allen, I think, all told in a vacuum, is my favorite because I just think he has slate breaking potential this week.
Yeah, if Allen and Burrow are coming in at similar ownerships, I prefer Allen straight up, pretty easily. But again, I'm kind of expecting Allen to be at least a bit more popular than Burrow on FanDuel, with them only separated by $600 in salary.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious most of all to see if Jalen Hurts is, very low this week, which is possible with the issues. Because if he is, I mean, it's at least worth throwing a couple out there. We know the potential limitations, but the other side of that is maybe they're up 35-3 at halftime because everybody scored touchdowns.
Yeah, Hurts is like not in my player pool right now because I'm thinking that way where, he's still a little banged up. Should be an easy win, so you're not going to get a ceiling game. If everyone's thinking that, maybe he does come in at 5% ownership, and in that case, he's an awesome tournament play.
I'd be curious too to see if Dak Prescott comes in low or if he comes in popular because of the one-sided matchup here.
Me too.
Running back for cash, I mentioned these guys on DraftKings, but they top our dollars per point on FanDuel as well. Najee Harris, Miles Sanders, the top two on both sites. I think they're both great bets for large workloads this week on motivated offenses, which is key, especially in week 18. Both in strongly positive matchups. Miles Sanders already crushed the Giants earlier this season. Najee Harris has been running much better since the team's bye. So these guys are probably going to be in my cash lineup together.
Yeah, I'm definitely more open to playing Sanders in FanDuel cash, just so, with the lack of pass catching stuff being less of a concern here. So he's in play. I think Najee Harris to me is my first running back in for cash. I think he's pretty much a must at $7,200 with the work he's been getting lately and the matchup against Cleveland. I like Tyler Algier as my third cash game running back. 53 carries over his last 3 games. I've seen a handful of targets in those games as well. I'm just playing really well. He's averaging 5.4 yards per carry over the last 3. And the Falcons are 4-point favorites in this game against Tampa, 22.25 point implied total, which again speaks to the fact that, the Bucs are probably going to be resting guys in this spot.
And I think, like you said, for Miles Sanders, the Tyler Algier is even more attractive here because of the lower reception scoring. For me, a full fade on $10,000 Christian McCaffrey this week. He's less than 100% health-wise. There's a chance they limit his work, even if overall they're going for it throughout the game. And then there's also the chance that the Niners pull up at some point because the Eagles have the top seed locked up. They're playing at the same time. But if we get to the third quarter and the Eagles are up by 20, then it would make sense for the 49ers to ease things.
Yeah, and the Niners could be up by 20 at that point too. So yeah, there's too many paths to McCaffrey disappointing relative to that price tag.
Tournament side, I'm curious to see the ownership projections for Harris and Sanders. Not necessarily full fades, even if it gets high, but that'll affect the plan. Also curious to see Cam Akers and Kenneth Walker because I'm interested in playing both of those guys in that matchup across from each other. Akers, 2 straight 100-yard games the past couple weeks, over 5 yards per carry in 3 straight. And Kenneth Walker, over 20 carries each of the past 2 weeks, despite dealing with an ankle issue. He already outperformed a negative matchup last week against the Jets. This matchup is probably softer because I don't expect the Rams to play Aaron Donald. So we should get plenty of work from both of these guys.
Yeah, Sanders is my favorite tournament play. I can't imagine he's going to be too popular considering he's done basically nothing for 3 straight games now. I do think guys like Najee Harris and Cam Akers, they're more interesting fades if they're chalky just because of the kind of crappy offenses they're on. Maybe they don't have that 25-point upside that we've seen Sanders have this season. Kenneth Walker is probably my second favorite tournament play, 26 and 23 carries over his last 2 games. I also go into that Sunday night game. I think Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon are both interesting. Aaron Jones looked as healthy as he has in a while in that win last week, 111 rushing yards on 14 carries. AJ Dillon has a touchdown, at least one touchdown in 5 straight games now. He's kind of been the Packers goal line guy over the second half of the season. So then you have Green Bay, 4.5-point home favorites. They have a 26.75 point implied total. That's third or fourth highest among all the games on Sunday. So I think there's definitely touchdown upside, just upside in general to both of these guys.
I got to check now to see how many times the Packers have actually scored that many points this year because I don't think that it's happened a whole lot. So, I mean, they did score 41 last week. They scored 26 the week before, 24 against the Rams, 28, 33 the 2 games before that. All right. So I guess I'm not giving them enough credit. There should be plenty of points there. And I agree, both running backs are going to be heavily involved in anything they do. On the other side, the Detroit running backs, I think, are interesting as well. I didn't really give them a good look to know what their salaries are offhand, but that's certainly a game where both offenses use their running backs quite a bit.
Yeah, Jamal's 7K and Swift is 7,100. So they don't stand out as good values. I'm sure they'll be lower owned because of the prices, but I'd much rather play the Packers side.
Mm-hmm. And tournament only for either
Yes.
Lions running back, of course. Wide receiver for cash, I think, you can look at the expensive guys. They are much higher in our FanDuel dollars per point than they are on DraftKings. Jamar Chase or Tee Higgins looks good. Tee Higgins, of course, is the less expensive. Stephon Diggs up there. Devontae Smith up there in value. Garrett Wilson at 7,100, I think, is intriguing. I wonder who's a better option between him at 7,100, Jerry Jeudy at 6,600 against a Chargers defense that might have nothing to play for by the time they play. Maybe they both belong in lineups.
They're both in my cash game lineup right now, Garrett Wilson and Jerry Jeudy. Jeudy has 9, 8, 10, and 8 targets over his last 4 games. He had 8 last week, even with Cortland Sutton back. So I like those two guys. And I like DK Metcalf too at 7,200, assuming that knee checks out. He did not practice on Thursday. So we'll see what he does later today, how he's listed on the final injury report. But, Tyler Lockett, obviously more banged up than DK with the finger injury and then the shin injury he suffered in last week's game. I'm sure Lockett's going to play because this is a must-win for Seattle, but he's nowhere near 100%. Metcalf had the dud last week against the tough Jets secondary, but over his previous 8 games, Metcalf averaged 9.5 targets, 6.9 catches, 73 yards per game. Also had a big game against the Rams earlier this season, so I think he's underpriced at $7,200 as long as that knee is not a concern.
Drake London's not as attractive on FanDuel with the half PPR scoring, but I think he's in play at 6,500 in a matchup that's already positive and a Bucs defense that's probably going to bench several DBs. They've had lots of defensive backs dealing with injuries throughout the second half of the season, so I wouldn't be surprised to see a bunch of those starters sitting out this game completely. On the cheap end, if you need it to get some of the higher end wide receivers or other positions in, I think Rashid Shaheed at 5,800 is attractive here as well as on DraftKings this week. I think Jahan Dotson is somebody that we haven't talked about that is also in play at $5,900. Jared, we saw an article from the Richmond Times-Dispatch earlier this week about how Ron Rivera said he'll probably play Terry McLaurin and Curtis Samuel for at least some of this game with Sam Howell. There wasn't any mention there of Jahan Dotson. So I don't know exactly if there's a plan to take out Dotson at any point, but it's a rookie wide receiver. He's not dealing with a particular injury at this point. And if you're going to try to get a good look at your 5th-round rookie quarterback, then you might as well play him with your 1st-round rookie wide receiver throughout the game to see if there's anything there over the next few seasons between them. So I think Jahan Dotson's intriguing at $5,900.
Yeah, I think for me, the chance that he's pulled would take him out of consideration for cash. It actually makes me like him more for tournaments, though. If there's a chance that he plays the whole game and McLaurin doesn't, then you could get even more volume from Dotson.
I just don't think there's much of a chance that they pull a rookie for somebody like Cam Sims. It'd be different if they had somebody behind him. I mean, you can take out Terry McLaurin and get a look at De'Ami Brown and have those guys playing together. So, it's week 18, so you can never say nothing's out of the question, but I'm going in not concerned about Dotson getting pulled.
He's at least cheap enough where, if he gets pulled and doesn't give you a big game, you could probably still survive in cash.
On the tourney side, Christian Watson at 6,900 is interesting. 1 catch last week playing through the hip injury that had him questionable, but 2nd on the team in targets, 3rd in routes. He's been targeted on about 26% of his routes since week 10, and right around that number for the entire season, actually. Ranks 23rd among all wide receivers for the season in targets per route, according to player profiler numbers. Limited in practice the past 2 days. That's at least a step up from last week where he didn't practice Wednesday or Thursday. And then we get Detroit as the matchup, 26th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. So it's an upside matchup for Watson.
For sure, yeah, and he's just a fun tournament play. There's obviously risk with the hip. I mean, if Watson did not have the hip issue, he'd be in play in cash for me at that price tag. So yeah, I definitely think he's an interesting tournament play. It'd be fun to go into Sunday night, down 15 points and having Christian Watson to go still. So I like that call. You mentioned Rashid Shaheed at $5,800. I actually think Chris Olave is a better play on FanDuel here. I think if you're playing both sides, play Shaheed on DraftKings where you're getting more of a discount. Play Olave on FanDuel. Just $6,700. Olave is the Panthers dead last in adjusted points allowed. Two wide receivers obviously just gave up that massive game to Mike Evans last week. Carolina especially struggles defending deep passes too, and we know Olave can win there. So I think he's a good tournament play at what I would think will be low ownership considering he hasn't done a whole lot lately.
And I honestly haven't checked in on JC Horn, the Panthers' top corner, yet this week, but I would doubt that he's playing this game.
Yeah, he was placed on IR either last week or earlier this week, so he's definitely out.
Mm-hmm. Tight end for cash, Dallas Goedert, $6,200 against the Giants. Strong matchup without having nothing to play for. Like if the Giants were playing to win this game, it would still be a strong matchup for Dallas Goedert. It's not. He leads our FanDuel dollars per point. That tells you that the salary savings don't matter as much as over on DraftKings, where we're just awash in 3K tight ends at the top of the value charts there. I think that you can pay down from top shelf at wide receiver if you need to get to Goddard. You don't have to do so to get to Goddard. There are some cheap options as well.
There are, but the gap between Goddard and the cheap options isn't as big on FanDuel as it is on DraftKings. So I'm definitely looking to get Goddard in my cash game lineup on FanDuel. As you said, awesome matchup. The Giants 32nd in Football Outsiders tight end coverage rankings.
And if you do need to pay down, if you're just wanting to go more expensive elsewhere, Tyler Conklin, 5,100, Tyler Higbee, 56, Hayden Hurst, 53. All of those guys are in play, I think, in positive matchups to different degrees. Tournament, what are you playing at tight end, Jared?
Yeah, I do like Higbee on FanDuel here. And on DraftKings, he's in play. He's expensive relative, where I think he's a nice value here at $5,600. I mean, obviously disappointed last week. Higbee did just 3 catches for 11 yards. Baker Mayfield only threw 19 passes in that game. So you have to, hope he throws it quite a bit more in this one. But Higbee still had a 21% target share last week, still ran her out on 76% of the pass play. So the usage was still pretty strong for him. And he gets Seattle, who is the best matchup for tight ends in adjusted points allowed at the position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. I like paying down for the cheapies better over here unless Goddard comes in lower owned than I'm anticipating. Dawson Knox is one other guy I want to throw in. $5,700 against the Patriots. If you look at his past 3 regular season meetings with the Patriots, you're like, there's no way I'm playing this guy. No catches in week 13 this year when the two teams played. 2 catches in each meeting last year in the regular season. But if you look at the playoffs, 5 targets, 5 receptions, 89 yards, 2 touchdowns. And really, that's the case here. It's not matchup. It's not Dawson Knox. It's Josh Allen's capable of just a different level at any given time. And he's capable of playing in a way where the matchup doesn't matter at all. And he showed us that he'll throw it to anybody. So it's just possible that Dawson Knox has that kind of game this week.
Yeah, he has the most touchdown upside among any of those tight ends in the 5K range, and especially on FanDuel, that's what we're looking for. I like David Njoku here as well. Talked about him on the DraftKings show. He's $5,400 on FanDuel. He's another guy who, right there with Dawson Knox, who I think has the highest ceiling among these cheaper tight ends. Njoku went for 19 FanDuel points against the Steelers back in week 3, so we've already seen him have a ceiling game in this matchup.
Defense, the Vikings for $3,700 versus Nathan Peterman. They top our value chart. It's difficult to get away from. And last week, it was, I don't think I'm playing another defense besides the 49ers against Jarrett Stidham. I'm not worried about that situation here, Jared. We've seen Nathan Peterman. He stinks.
Yeah. I'm worried after playing 100% Niners defense last week and getting burned by it. I mean, I think Stidham's better than Peterman. I also think that the Niners D is a lot better than Minnesota. So, I mean, anything can happen with defenses, but
Nathan Peterman's also not going to have Devontae Adams or Darren Waller or Josh Jacobs with him in this game.
Yeah, I mean, there's also a risk the Bears just run it 40 times and say, let's just get out of here. In cash, I'm definitely playing Minnesota. I don't think there's a reason to go anywhere else. We'll see how high the ownership projection comes in on them. I do think for slightly cheaper, the Dolphins against Joe Flacco for $3,500 are a decent play. And then I think Atlanta for $3,400 against what I expect to be Bucs backups for a lot of that game. They're options to pivot to in tournaments.
If the salary doesn't matter, the Colts at 4,100 against the Texans are certainly a fine option. I'd probably rather spend that somewhere else, but if you're setting a lineup and it just fits, then there's certainly nothing wrong with playing that. Maybe last week's issue with the 49ers defense will help keep people from loading up on the Vikings this week.
I was going to say, how about going back to the 49ers after they burned everyone last week? I mean, they're $4,900, but they get David Blau and this Cardinals team with nothing left to play for. So I think they're interesting if you can afford them.
I don't know. What did Jarrett Stidham have to play for last week? Jerk.
Pride.
That's going to do it for this week 18 FanDuel podcast. You can head over to draftsharks.com now to play around with the lineup generator, build your own lineups for FanDuel, DraftKings, and Yahoo this weekend. You can also find Kevin's articles highlighting top picks for cash and tournament entries on FanDuel. For Jared Small and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schaff saying thanks so much for swimming with us.